Hello, everyone, and welcome back for session 3 of our summer AI bootcamp, where we're going to talk about how to scale your AI impact. Over the last 2 sessions, we answered 2 important questions. We talked about what is AI and how do we get ready for it. And so by now, hopefully, you've addressed readiness, you've identified use cases, you've built a roadmap, you've trained your people, and you've started to launch your first AI efforts. And the question today is different. The question today is, how do you turn that AI activity of yours into measurable business value? And here's how. We start by measuring what matters, because you can't decide what to scale until you know what's working. And just calling it like I see it, most organizations today, we find are measuring the wrong things. And then we scale what works. Not everywhere, not everything, and not all at once, but you take a proven win and you scale it with intention. And then we'll talk about building the adoption engine so that we not only bring the team along for the ride, but we empower them to be catalysts for the impact that we want them to help us have. We'll spend some time on governance, which at this point should be less of a bureaucratic approval gate and more of a coordination hub that has an operating rhythm in place to make sure that the trains run on time, on tracks, on schedule, and get everyone safely to their appointed destinations. And then the fun begins where we go beyond the chat experience to where AI really shines, but a lot of companies don't go. The agents, the automations, the workflows, things that can be purpose-built for your team and provide solutions that can be tailor-made to solve your team's real-world business problems, but are very much underutilized today. And we'll close on how to take this successful launch of yours and bake it into your company's culture and strategy and operating rhythm so that it's not just sustained, but that it continues to evolve and adapt and improve and deliver value over time. So let's talk about measuring what matters, which has more nuance to it than people might realize. So let's start by defining what it is that matters, and then we can worry about how to measure it. And the thing is that whatever AI tools you use, there's going to be some degree of native telemetry, possibly even some integrated analytical instrumentation. But in most cases, their focus is limited to activity-based metrics because that's all they can see. And it can be tempting to just pass these up the chain as evidence of one's impact, but they're really not. They're just evidence of activity. They can tell you whether you're in the game, but they don't tell you if you're winning the game. And too often they end up serving as vanity metrics. They can frequently facilitate self-congratulatory updates if that's what you're after. But even though they're not unimportant, they're not the score. They're just the stats. They don't actually tell you if you're winning, but they can tell you where to look. Things like licenses assigned, prompts submitted, active users, and so on, it's all good stuff. And they often correlate to value, but that's not always the case. And it shouldn't be assumed. It's got to be measured so it can be validated. And AI used poorly can slow you down almost as much as AI used well can speed you up. Your team might be using agents day and night, but that doesn't mean they're using the right agents. Doesn't mean those agents were built right. Doesn't mean they're using those agents right. It just means that they're being used, right? So you can get a participation trophy for that, but it doesn't necessarily get you a win. So we need to know whether and to what degree a difference is actually being made. Things like time saved on work that actually matters, quality and consistency of work, revenue and margin increased, experiences improved, risks averted, processes enhanced, and so on. That's good stuff, but we need measurements on both sides to figure out if the correlation implied by the activity is actually validated in impact. And so whether you're trying to generate or temper hype within your organization, or whether you're dealing with an overabundance of optimism or pessimism, you're going to want and you're going to need to have defensible data. Because without measurement, all of your AI discussions become opinions. Every investment becomes a hunch. And good data is the diamond that can cut through any glass arguments about what we should do and how to prioritize our efforts. So if there's a metric out there that doesn't help you decide whether to scale something, improve something, or stop something, it's not the metric that matters. It's not your signal. It's noise. And you might need to filter it accordingly. But with good data, you can make really good decisions. So you need value metrics instead of just vanity metrics. That way you can understand whether you're seeing correlation or causation. So question is, how do we validate it? And there, you start with the outcome. The outcome dictates the metrics, and the metric dictates where you look. Sometimes you might be lucky enough to have quantitative data already. Sometimes you may only have qualitative data. Sometimes you may have both. Sometimes you may have neither, and you need to create the metric that you need. And sometimes the work to create that metric is a pretty high cost to it on its own. You may decide the juice of having the data isn't worth the squeeze required to produce it, and you'll have to decide whether or not that margin of error is acceptable to you or not, right? Because it limits the amount of information you have with which to make your decisions about what to stop, what to iterate, and what to scale. So that's why baselining matters a lot, because if you don't know how long something takes today, you won't be able to approve whether or not AI actually saved you time on it tomorrow. The cleanest pattern is usually the simplest one, which is just baseline the current process, define what success should look like, measure usage and impact together, and then review the data with your AI counsel and your business owner. And the decision's got to be an honest one, because if the metrics are improving and users are engaged, it's time to invest more and scale that. If the results are mixed, but it feels like the friction there is fixable, it's time to iterate and improve on what we're doing. And if the usage is low and things aren't getting better after you've given it a fair shot, it's time to give up the ghost, right? To stop things that don't work isn't failure, it's conservation. Conservation's a good thing to have in this context. Scaling the wrong thing is failing. And sometimes it's unpopular, and sometimes it can hurt because people might have put some blood, sweat, and tears into that thing. But resources are finite, and the time and energy you spend trying to salvage a lost cause is time and energy you aren't spending on a worthy one. So in those scenarios, we got to be honest with ourselves, document the learnings for posterity, pack it up for the archive, take our ball and go home. But it is easier said than done. And if you were to show me a company that says that every one of its initiatives was a winner, I'd show you a company that either lacks ambition, doesn't measure right, or isn't honest with itself. If you show me a team that isn't at least a little bit bummed when you snuff out one of their prized AI initiatives, I'll show you a team that might not have been invested enough to give it the fair shake that it deserved. And so arguments are going to ensue, but nothing's going to stop an argument like good facts. You need a baseline, you need to capture the before so that you can determine the effect, right? And see if that improvement is provable instead of just felt or hoped for. You got to measure usage and outcomes together, because usage alone just tells you people showed up. Outcomes alone don't tell you why. You need both. And that review process is often the first thing to decay, where it's never the urgent, critical thing, right? But it's the important thing, which means it's a risk to get deprioritized. We kick the can down the road. We say we're going to come back to it, and it sometimes happens, and sometimes it doesn't. And the thing here is that you got to put it on a cadence with the appropriate business owners and the AI counsel in the room. That's when the right conversation is going to happen. You need to have a report, ideally a one-page report that gives you ROI and it gives you outcomes, something that a busy executive is actually going to read. There's a time and a place for all of your other awesome data, and it's called in the appendix and not in an executive meeting. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm just saying it shouldn't be on your one-page report that you want to give your executives to make decisions and guide investments around your AI work. If you do this, the decisions are going to get easier, right? Whether to scale, iterate, or stop just becomes a lot less about superstition and a lot more about science. When you've worked hard to collect the receipts, the decision-making not just gets easier, but also gets more collaborative, right? Because you won't have to tell the team that it's time to bury a project. They'll see the same data you see, and they'll come to you with a shovel in hand ready to do it for you. And better still, they'll probably tell you what they think they should be working on instead, because you'll have that signal too. People want to do well. And if you have the right data in place, this becomes an open book test. And your engaged team members are going to pass it if you give them the data. So when we talk about scale, it helps to clarify what scaling means because it can get used a little loosely. And so when we say scaling here, this is not a general intention to use more AI. It's a specific system of repeating successful outcomes more consistently, right? Which means you have to capture what's working, find the wins that have measurable impact behind them instead of just enthusiasm. And you've got to document and templatize the work, the prompts, the workflows, the inputs, the lessons learned. That's not glamorous work, but it's noble and it's necessary work. And it makes everything you want to achieve thereafter possible. Winners are good at keeping score, but they should also be good at taking notes. Because if you're not, you're going to end up wasting time relearning what you already should know or redoing what should have already been done. That's not something smart teams do. Once you've got that, you're in a position to standardize, you're in a position to share. Now you can coach, teach, train, reinforce, take this one win and turn it into a team win, right? If you're publishing the proven practices, that's when you have an open book test, right? If they have the stuff and they can see that it works, then you won't have to sell them on how to do things the way you want them to because they'll get it. And you don't have to sell somebody on something they've already got. This will allow you to be very deliberate in how you expand because you can prioritize based on evidence and look for synergies where one win can unlock others. And this is also what allows you to retire the things that aren't working, right? Stop doing stuff that doesn't work is a key lesson here. But I've worked with many a client, and I've even found myself falling into the pattern before, where you're an optimist or you're an idealist, and Charlie Brown thinks they're going to kick that football today, and it doesn't happen, right? Do your due diligence, measure what matters, scale the stuff that's working, but you got to be willing to stop the stuff that doesn't. Organizations tend to not scale because they've got more ideas. They scale because they've built a system for identifying and validating and repeating those successes so that they're able to scale actual outcomes instead of tools or enthusiasm. The biggest mistake that organizations make is they treat adoption like it's a launch activity. They assign licenses, they schedule trainings, they send announcements, and then they sit around 6 months later scratching their heads wondering why nobody's behavior changed. And how you avoid that is that first, leaders need to visibly use the tools themselves, not sponsoring the tools or advocating for them, but actually using them, right? Whatever you have to say about embracing AI isn't going to matter if they don't see you walking the walk. And then champions have to be positioned and empowered and celebrated for helping their peers learn and apply AI in their day-to-day work. You'll want to have a community that gives people a safe place to ask questions and to share ideas. Super critical there. Could be teams, could be engage, could be something else, but it's got to be something. Because if you don't have that venue or you don't have that culture, it's not that they won't have questions, it's that they won't ask them. It's not that they won't have ideas, it's that you won't know what they are, right? At that point, though, you get to benefit from it because training can evolve from general awareness, guidance, technical, how do you do stuff, into role-based capability that's much more specific, much more actionable. How do you do these specific things to do your job? People will lean forward on that information, same people that'll lean back if you just try and tell them about some new feature that's been lit up. And then measurement and recognition matter, right? They create momentum by making your progress visible. When those things reinforce each other, adoption becomes self-sustaining because success creates confidence. Confidence drives adoption. More adoption gives you more success stories. More success stories inspire more engagement. More engagement means more learning. More learning gives you better proficiency. Better proficiency means better outcomes. It means success. And that momentum will keep you from suffering from organizational inertia. So if you treat it like an event, it'll pass like an event. But if you treat it like a culture, it's going to stick. And it's worth noting that as your engagement and your success scale, so does your governance surface, right? As you move forward, like we said, this should be less about approvals and more about coordination. You've got to remain vigilant about data classification and loss prevention and whatnot. But the thing that can really sneak up on you is the sprawl, winding up with a bunch of agents that nobody owns. You have multiple flows firing in different directions off the same trigger, or agents that are grounded on stale sources or tied to expired credentials. These are all things that don't just disrupt work, they also diminish credibility in the work itself. And it's going to be harder for you to re-engage team around leveraging some of these solutions if they haven't proven to be effective, even if the underlying cause isn't the technology or how you built it, it's actually an operational deficiency or a cultural deficiency. The team won't always be in a position to see and connect those dots. They'll just see that the stuff doesn't work well. And they'll go back to doing what they know. They'll go back to doing what worked for them previously. So it's a lot easier to maintain trust than it is to re-win it. And so the price of admission here is that you've got to know your portfolio. You've got to know what you've got. You got to know who owns it. You got to know whether it's working so that you know what to scale and what to stop. But you can't manage what you can't see. So you've got to operationalize it and make it real with things like a central catalog that gives you the ability to have your people check that catalog before they go and put a hat on a hat, building things that you already have and don't need another of. That can also give you the ability to always have line of sight to who owns what, who's the backup owner for what, and how are we meant to use the thing. This can help facilitate review paths that you can size to the actual risk, because you don't want to have to convene an assembly of village elders every time someone wants to share a prompt, but you also don't want to be in a position where you have no checks and balances in place when somebody's launching an agent that's going to handle sensitive data or provide critical guidance, right? You got to have the right sized governance to meet that need. And you have to have a review cadence. Sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's quarterly, sometimes it'll vary as time goes on. But this is how you keep your eyes on the ball to make sure that you don't wind up with a sprawling set of tools of varying use and functionality and quality, right? Make sure that you have what you need and you need what you have. Both are important. And so governance tends to be the thing that separates a successful AI program from random acts of AI. And so some of us think about governance primarily in the context of getting ready. Governance is actually the run state. It's how you sustain the work that you've done. When it's done right, it shouldn't be slowing you down. And it shouldn't be about saying no to stuff, but it should be the thing that lets you keep saying yes and scaling both safely and effectively. So this is why you still need that AI council. Last time we talked about the role that this team plays as you work your way to launch, and the premise remains the same. It's that when everybody owns AI, nobody does. And so if you have a small cross-functional group that owns these priorities, these guardrails, and these outcomes, that's going to make the thing work. Like we talked about, this shouldn't just be leaders and managers. It shouldn't be people that are all within one discipline. These should be people that can really represent the interests and insights of your entire organization. And so leading up to launch, you're probably meeting with that team weekly or bi-weekly. And now, once the plane's in the air, you might throttle that back to monthly, but the work is largely the same. You're still prioritizing use cases, right? You're making sure that your finite capacity is getting put to the highest value opportunities, and you're defining guardrails so you find the right balance between risk and security and compliance, but also agility and innovation. You're assigning owners, you're tracking adoption and value over time. This team's deciding what's going to scale, iterate, or stop. And they're also planning that next wave so we can solve more business problems as we go, because you might have a lot of things that are proving value that absolutely should be scaled. It still doesn't mean you're going to want to do it all at once. And so prioritization is another critical function that this team plays. And so this is where it's really important to have that measurement in place, right, to inform those decisions so that they can be made well. And it's that authority to say what scales, what iterates, and what stops that makes this a council instead of just a committee, right? They're not making recommendations, they're making decisions that guide organizational investments. And so it helps at that point to know what's possible, right? Because when most of us think of AI, we're thinking of a chat window where we ask questions and we get answers and we go on about our day. But that's kind of like, that's just the trailer. It's not the movie. It starts with those chat assistants, right? And they can help you do things faster, drafts, research, meeting summaries. That's pretty much where every one of us starts. And there's real value there. There's actually more value than people realize there. It just doesn't stop there, right? Because then we have shared knowledge where you get to reuse patterns that we already know to be effective, both within AI experiences with things like shared prompts and reusable instructions, and in things like templates that live inside adjacent solutions that AI can leverage, like PowerPoint, Word, and so on. Then you've got workflows that can automate repetitive handoffs for things like approvals, notifications, or routing, right? Think about it this way. If you've got anybody in your organization that you're paying to play traffic cop, install a traffic light and let that person go do something better. And you've got agents that can combine knowledge and action, right? That could be an IT help desk agent, an HR assistant, an onboarding agent, all kinds of possibilities there. You've got built-in first-party agents, you've got third-party agents, and you've got increasingly improving capabilities to build your own agents. And then you have the ability to create integrated solutions where AI actually gets embedded into the core processes that your business runs. So things like inspections, service delivery, project management, manufacturing, whatever the case is, there's very rarely these days not an opportunity for AI to accelerate or simplify or streamline or automate the work that's happening there. And these things aren't all the same thing, right? And too many organizations are exclusively using chat, or they're maybe just starting to dabble with agents and they're missing the boat because they do have workflows. They do have scenarios where we want to be able to provide the same quality of guidance on the same set of circumstances multiple times, and we shouldn't be prompting our way to get there if we can create an agent that can retain that context and continue to perform better and better for your team. So like we said last time, you don't want to boil the ocean, but you don't want to let all that capability to go by the wayside either. So it still comes down to picking the right tool for the right job so that, you know, you're not just deploying more technology for technology's sake, because who cares how much technology you have, but you're able to really focus on the things that help improve how work gets done. And there's sometimes this ambition that we hear from customers where they'll say, well, I mean, I spent a lot of money on it, so I want to use it. I get it. I don't encourage you to look at the work that way, because ultimately justifying an expense doesn't help you get the work done, right? It's either the right tool or it's not. And by the way, if it's not the right tool, you probably should stop spending money on it. And then you can celebrate how you've helped conserve the organization's financial resources. Go spend that money on something better. So the question isn't about like, what else can AI do? Because we do hear that a lot. Like, what are the new features in Copilot? And I do it too. I'm a bit of a nerd. I look up to see this month, what did Copilot learn to do today? What did Claude learn to do this month? Right? And it's good to have that information so that you can make informed decisions about what the right capability might be. But the real question that you should be asking within an organization is, how do we turn successful experiments into repeatable business capability, right? Because if you don't know the answer to the former, what the AI can do, you really can't properly answer the latter of what you should do with it. Because sometimes the answer is as simple as a better prompt. Sometimes it's updating instructions. Sometimes it's a workflow, could be a low-code app. Sometimes it's an agent that can retrieve knowledge and answer questions or take action across different systems. Each option has value to deliver, but they also come with different levels of complexity and governance and support requirements. So you're back to, okay, there's a lot of stuff. What is it that I should actually build? And the answer is you build the simplest one that reliably achieves the desired outcome. You build the simplest one that reliably achieves the desired outcome, right? As you move down this table, you gain more capability, and that's fun, but you're also taking on more responsibility, more ownership, more governance, more cost, more maintenance, more support. A prompt is a lot easier to sustain than a workflow. Workflow is a lot easier than an agent. An agent is a lot easier to sustain than some custom integrated solution. And that's before we even talk about whether or not you've got the people and the skills and the capacity to support it, right? The best solution isn't necessarily the most advanced one. It's the one your organization can successfully build, own, and sustain. Now, you may have within your organization the technical expertise and the capacity to build and support some of these awesome technical capabilities, and you may not. You may be working with a Microsoft partner who's great at this stuff. There's still a lot of partners out there who are not yet great at this stuff. You might not be working with a partner at all, and your direct line of support goes to Microsoft. And that support experience doesn't delight everybody, right? So you got to be thoughtful about what are the resources that we have to make sure that we can sustain this awesome solution, because the place you don't want to be is you spent money and invested effort to deliver some really cool, sophisticated, fancy thing. And the first time something goes wrong, we have no idea what it is. We don't know where to begin. We can't even solve the problem because we don't understand the problem. That's a spot you don't want to find yourself in. So we always got to think about long-term, how durable is this solution? And that might mean that there's good ideas you don't execute against, and there's good solutions you don't provide because you're not in a position to sustain them. And that's also where having that organizational self-awareness can go a really long way to helping you make the right choices. Because just like your non-AI solutions, everything you use, you take on a technical debt, and that debt is paid in governance. So if you're hearing people say, this would be cool, instead of saying, this would work well, it's probably time to recalibrate, because you will end up preferring substance over style, and you will end up being grateful for sustainability over sophistication, because there are graveyards full of ambitious solutions that nobody maintained because it seemed like a good idea at the time. They thought it would be cool. It probably was cool, but we look back on those things later and go, you should have known better. So we want to keep it simple. What's the job and what'll get the job done? That's the stuff you want to go build. And then the good news is that there's a lot of impact to be had, right? You take a look at what success can actually look like in an AI-driven world where it's not about people having licenses or how many agents you build. The focus was on making work better, right? In an organization like that, what you'll see is that knowledge has been democratized and people are spending less time hunting for information. They're spending more time using it. And questions are getting answered more quickly with sources. And institutional knowledge is actually getting institutionalized. You've got people that are spending more time on more meaningful work because the routines and minutia of their work has been automated for them. And so things like triage and routing and approvals, and reminders and follow-ups, that stuff still gets done. It's just that people spend less time doing it, if they spend any time doing it. So decisions happen faster, and teams can access insights when they need them. They can analyze information more quickly. They can make better decisions, right? While keeping humans in the loop where judgment belongs and keeping them out of it where it's not needed. This is what will allow you to let expertise become scalable so that people can get up and running faster. And so when people do have questions, you don't have to worry about them finding random ones. They'll find the same reliable answers that'll help drive consistency of execution. creation can happen faster, because people are able to paint by numbers instead of working off of blank canvases. So they can iterate and they can calibrate faster. And people get to spend that time on things like refining something and improving its quality instead of trying to brainstorm, work through writer's block, and get something started. AI might not give you exactly what you need, but it'll give you a better head start than you otherwise would have had. And it can give you more options to consider more thoroughly and faster than you ever would have otherwise. This is also a world where meetings become more impactful and people can be more present because they're not having to furiously take notes as somebody says something. They know that their co-pilot's there to help them out. And so actions are getting effectively captured. Transcripts become searchable organizational knowledge. And it might look a little different for your team than it does for the one represented here on the slide. But if you do it right, they're going to be working smarter instead of harder. They're going to have more time and capacity to do more meaningful work. And you get to decide how to spend that capacity. And that's where some really fun things can happen. So to make it actionable, right? Look at this slide, and if you wanted to just take one slide back to your leadership team, you could do worse than this one. Because what this is telling us is that some organizations, right, they might be looking for a 3-year roadmap. I get asked for 3-year roadmaps a lot. The reality is, I can't tell you what you ought to be doing in year 3 until I can see what happened in year 2. But I can tell you what you should be doing in your first 90 days, right? The goal there is to take an approach that's structured enough to work, but it's simple enough to start. So in your first 30 days, you're focused on proving value. You're instrumenting the things that are already live. You're establishing the baseline so that you can measure improvement going forward. You're identifying the highest value use cases, and you're starting to evaluate whether or not there's things that should be retired. And you're also looking at what are the things that you might want to pursue next. What you're not doing in the first 30 days is you're not deploying a bunch of new stuff, which is deliberate, because before you scale, you got to understand what you have, what success actually looks like in your organization now. Then in month 2, you can start expanding and building on that capability. By this point, training should become more role-based and department-specific, less generic, less technical, less product-centric. You, at this point, should be able to identify who some of your AI champions and peer leaders are going to be. You're getting hands-on to keyboards, solving real business problems, and starting to collect the success stories that you're going to want to amplify across your organization, because that excitement will help people get started. And if they get started, they'll be able to form habits, and habits are what keeps it sustaining. And so in the 3rd month, you are probably publishing shared libraries of proven prompts, practices, and patterns. You are hopefully broadcasting some of these success stories, and where appropriate, you're adding those practices into your SOPs, your onboarding documentation, your performance conversations, your recognition programs. You might be establishing your operating rhythm at this point. The council should have its cadence. There should be the review cycle. We should have reporting in place, and we should have clearly defined ownership over all of our AI initiatives. And that's where it starts to move from being an initiative to a capability. Because once that's in place, you can enter that cycle that we were talking about, where you can measure and then learn and then improve and then scale and then rinse and repeat. And 90 days isn't usually going to be enough to transform your business, but it's absolutely enough to start proving value, building the muscle, and earning the right to phase your next phase of evolution, right? Because you'll have evidence to base it on instead of just intentions or enthusiasm. Which takes us to how to actually scale. Because no matter how well you launch, or how thoughtfully you govern, or how successful your early pilots are, eventually they're going to stagnate if you don't have a way to turn those isolated successes into organizational capabilities. Successful AI programs don't stand still. They'll have compounding value. And most organizations over-index on launching AI, but the best organizations are going to focus on creating a system that lets them continuously learn, improve, and scale stuff that works. Like we said throughout this session, it starts with a business problem. The business problem becomes a use case, a team pilots it, and if it delivers meaningful value, it creates a win. which is important because we don't want to be in the business of scaling assumptions. We don't want to be scaling enthusiasm. We want to be scaling impact. And that's why we have to measure what matters and pilot with a purpose so that we can focus on the outcomes. But once we've got a win, work's still not done because not every win is going to scale. First, we got to validate it. Was that impact real? Was it repeatable? Was it worth the effort? And if it proves out, you can refine it and you can standardize it because the real asset isn't actually the use case. It isn't even actually the win. The real asset is the playbook that allows you to take a success that one person made, make it scalable for others. A success that only one person can reproduce isn't something you should scale. Anyone can reproduce it. That's what you should be scaling. So now you find yourself in a spot where you are ready to scale and you've got more teams can begin running the play. Those teams are generating new insights. Those insights are revealing new problems and new opportunities. Those opportunities are becoming new use cases. Those use cases are creating new wins for you. And what started as a single pilot becomes a growing portfolio of successful AI initiatives and business outcomes. And so every new success should make the next success easier to achieve. And that's what we mean by institutionalizing the ability to scale. It's creating a system where success is not isolated, it's repeatable, it's teachable, it's expandable. Governance keeps it safe, but it's scaling that allows AI to create more value. And together, they allow capability and value to compound over time. And so scale is one thing. It's an important thing, but scale in and of itself doesn't make impact sustainable. It's culture that does that. And you can have a great strategy and diligent governance and good data and still fail miserably if you don't have a culture that can sustain it. And this goes back to organizational self-awareness and being honest with yourself about your organization's cultural strengths and deficiencies. If you don't think you have cultural deficiencies, that's your first deficiency, by the way. What we see is that AI success is ultimately it's a reflection of your culture, not your technology. You can get all the technology right. Doesn't mean you're going to win. And it matters a lot more knowing which buttons to press with your team in most cases than it does which buttons to press in the software. Because I can tell you lots of stories about healthy organizations that did great things with limited time and resources. But I can tell you a lot more stories about unhealthy organizations and how they squandered opportunities because their culture either failed to reinforce the right behaviors or even worse, it actively rewarded the wrong ones. These are teams that were more interested in looking good than doing good, more interested in being right than being effective, teams that leverage expertise as power, that are content with status quo. They find themselves complacent about the normalization of policy or procedural deviance. They're afraid to fail, incurious, and unambitious. Don't be that company. Nobody likes that company. And nobody likes working for that company either, by the way. If you want to build a culture that specifically contributes to a healthy AI program, you'll want to engage your people in a couple areas, right? So challenge the status quo respectfully, but challenge it. Just because it's how we've done things doesn't mean it's right. And if challenged, be willing to explain why things are instead of getting defensive about them. Just because we've always done something a certain way doesn't mean we should continue doing it that way. In healthy cultures, you're going to celebrate learnings, not just winnings. You're going to chase progress instead of perfection. You're going to see AI as a starting point, not an ending point. And you'll be able to acknowledge the expertise that people have, but what you'll reward, what's respected and valued in an organization, will be how effectively people help other people succeed, right? And when that's working, you'll see some of these signs, right? The team is going to expose challenges instead of sweeping them under the rug. They'll challenge their own assumptions, and they will seek to understand why things are the way they are before deciding that they're not how they ought to be. They'll develop a respectful but sincere disdain for unnecessary and manual work. But instead of complaining about it, they'll try and help find a better way. They'll recycle, reuse, or repurpose resources before they waste time with unnecessary reinvention. And none of them are going to want to be caught being the only person that knows something, because what that's going to do is identify them as the person who didn't share it and who's holding the team back. In a healthy organization like this, people will experiment freely and responsibly. They're going to iterate quickly, and they'll take the loss if it is one instead of trying to gaslight everybody into thinking they won something. They'll work hard, but they won't conflate activity with impact. And they won't go fixing things that aren't broke. But they also won't be satisfied just because something works well enough. And eventually, this continuous improvement can become a new normal, a habit that they can default to, because that's kind of where you really want to go, as destination is not adoption or deployment or prompts or agents or workflows or dashboards or any of that stuff. The destination is a culture that can continuously improve itself. It's a culture that shares what it learns and questions what isn't working, builds on what already works, and gets a little better every day. Because AI adoption, when you're done with the adoption portion of it, is largely about when just improvement becomes a habit. And once the improvement becomes a habit, that impact that you're after tends to take care of itself. Which brings us to the end of our journey, and is the 6 points we'd leave you with, right? First, measure what matters. Usage tells you people tried AI. Outcomes will tell you whether or not they worked. The goal is never about prompts or logins or licenses or activity. The goal is about business impact so that you can scale what works. Don't scale enthusiasm or assumptions, scale evidence, proven value. Take proven wins, make them repeatable, and expand them deliberately. And don't be afraid to retire things that aren't creating value. Then you got to build an adoption engine. Adoption is not an event, it's a system. It requires leadership and champions and training and support and reinforcement and success stories, because technology doesn't create value. It's the people that create the value. You still have to manage governance, right? Not bureaucracy, but coordination. Know what exists, know who owns it, know what's working, know what to scale, know what to stop. Then break out of the chat window. Use the chat window and use it really well, but eventually your needs are going to want you to mature beyond just using the chat window. It's rarely where the biggest value ends, right? So agents, automations, workflows, apps, these can help you solve bigger problems and create deeper business impact than you can with just the chat. But it's only when they're matched to the right problem and supported by the right level of ownership and governance that you're going to be able to get the most out of them and sustain it. And then finally, institutionalizing success, right? Build systems that allow value to scale, build culture that allows value to continue. Because successful AI organizations, they don't stand still. They learn, they improve, they share, they adapt. And over time, that compounds. And that's really the underlying message of everything we've covered, right? Is that AI is not just a project to complete. Can't just check the box and move on. It's a capability that you are going to need to build and sustain. And so thank you for spending time with us, not just today, but for anybody that stuck with us through all three of these sessions. Thank you for sticking through it for these 3 sessions. We hope we've made them worth your while. And if there's one thing I would encourage you to take from this, it's that AI doesn't create business value. People do. I'm excited about technology. I love that many of you are excited about technology. Don't be more excited about technology than you are about helping your people succeed. The technology is awesome. It's getting better and better by the day. But the reality is that every organization in your market has access to AI. Anybody can buy licenses. Anybody can build agents. Anybody can automate processes. There's no advantage in access. The advantage is now, and it always has been, in the execution. And so it's about how clearly you define the problem and prepare your people and govern the technology, how honestly you measure your outcomes, how disciplined you are about scaling the things that work, how willing you are to stomach stopping what doesn't. And the organizations that win aren't going to be the ones with the biggest budgets or the most agents or the best technology. They'll be the ones that learned the fastest and improved the most consistently and created cultures that help them turn innovation into impact. That's how you take AI from a curiosity to a capability to value. So start with outcomes, measure what improves, scale what works, build awesome habits. And if you'd like any help turning any of this into a plan, whether that's a readiness assessment, an adoption strategy, a measurement framework, a governance model, a roadmap, we've got some people here at NetLogic that are pretty good at that stuff. And if you want to keep the conversation going, the link's on the screen. And with that, go build something that matters and let us know if you'd like our help with it. Thank you.